the life divine, the triple transformation. This is the first result, but the second is a free inflow of all kinds of spiritual experience, experience of self, experience of the Ishvara and the divine Shakti, experience of cosmic consciousness, a direct touch with cosmic forces and with the occult movements of universal nature, a psychic sympathy and unity, and inner communication and interchanges of all kinds with other beings and with nature, illuminations of the mind by knowledge, illuminations of the heart by love and devotion and spiritual joy and ecstasy, illuminations of the sense and the body by higher experience. So the first result we finished reading earlier, and this is the second result of what? Of the psychic coming forward and the outer crust of the outer nature breaking. So the first result is a guidance, a governance begins from within, which exposes every movement to the light of truth, repels what is false, obscure, opposed to the divine realization. Every region of the being, every nook and corner of it, every movement, formation, direction, inclination of thought, will, emotion, sensation, action, reaction, motive, disposition, propensity, desire, habit of the conscious or subconscious physical, even the most concealed, camouflaged, mute recondite is lighted up with the unerring psychic light, and their confusion dissipated. This is the first result. The second is this, our reading again. Illuminations of the mind by knowledge, illuminations of the heart by love and devotion and spiritual joy, experience of the cosmic consciousness, illuminations of dynamic action in the truth and largeness of a purified mind and heart and soul, the certitudes of the divine light and guidance, the joy and power of the divine force working in the will and the conduct. These experiences are the result of an opening outward of the inner and inmost being and nature. So these experiences are the result of an opening outward of the inner and inmost being and nature. So inner and inmost being are two different things. Inner being and the inmost being and nature. For then there comes into play the soul's power of unerring inherent consciousness, its vision, its touch on things, which is superior to any mental cognition. There is there, native to the psychic consciousness and its pure working, an immediate sense of the world and its being, a direct inner contact with them, and a direct contact with the self and with the divine. A direct knowledge, a direct sight of truth and of all truths, a direct penetrating spiritual emotion and feeling, a direct intuition of right will and right action, a power to rule and to create an order of the being, not by the gropings of the superficial self, but from within, from the inner truth of self and things and the occult realities of nature. So some of these experiences can come by an opening of the inner mental and vital being, the inner and larger and subtler mind and heart and life within us, without any full emergence of the soul, the psychic entity, since there too there is a power of direct contact of consciousness. But the experience might then be of a mixed character, for there could be an emergence not only of the subliminal knowledge, but of the subliminal ignorance, an insufficient expansion of the being, a limitation by mental idea, by narrow and selective emotion, or by the form of the temperament, so that there would be only an imperfect self-creation and action, and not the free soul emergence, could easily occur. In the absence of any or of a complete psychic emergence, experiences of certain kinds, experiences of greater knowledge and force, a surpassing of the ordinary limit, might lead to a magnified ego and even bring about, instead of an outflowering of what is divine or spiritual, an uprush of the titanic or demoniac, or might call in agencies and powers which, though not of this disastrous type, are of a powerful but inferior cosmic character. But the rule and guidance of the soul brings into all experience the tendency of light, of integration, of harmony, and intimate rightness, which is native to the psychic essence. So unlike this, whenever there is the rule and guidance of the soul, it always brings in harmony, intimate rightness, integration, tendency towards light. A psychic, or more widely speaking, a psycho-spiritual transformation of this kind would be already a vast change of our mental human nature. Now, this is where we ended last time. But all this change and all this experience, though psychic and spiritual in essence and character, would still be in its parts of life effectuation on the mental, vital, and physical level. Its dynamic spiritual outcome would be a flowering of the soul in mind and life and body. But in act and form, it would be circumscribed within the limitations, however enlarged, uplifted, and rarefied, of an inferior instrumentation. It would be a reflected and modified manifestation of things whose full reality, intensity, largeness, oneness, and diversity of truth and power and delight are above us, above mind, and therefore above any perfection within mind's own formula of the foundations or superstructure of our present nature. A highest spiritual transformation must intervene on the psychic or psycho-spiritual change. The psychic movement inward to the inner being, the self or divinity within. 2. The psychic higher spiritual transformation must intervene on the psychic or psycho-spiritual change. The psychic movement inward to the inner being, the self or divinity within us, must be completed by an opening upward to a supreme spiritual status or a higher existence. So this psychic inward movement must also be completed by an opening upward of a supreme spiritual status. This can be done by our opening into what is above us, by an ascent of consciousness in the ranges of overmind and supramental nature, in which the sense of self and spirit is ever unveiled and permanent, and in which the self-luminous instrumentation of the self and spirit is not restricted or divided as in our mind nature, our life nature, body nature. So this inward realization and bringing forward the psychic needs to be simultaneously. The psycho-spiritual change needs to be also to be able to bring about a full change of nature in all the parts of the being, and the full intensity and manifestation, whose full reality, intensity, openness, and diversity, so on. All of that, for that to happen, there needs to be also a highest spiritual transformation, which he calls an ascent into the overmind and the supramental nature, in which the sense of self and spirit is ever unveiled and permanent, and in which the self-luminous instrumentation of the self and spirit is not restricted or divided as in our mind nature, life nature, body nature. This also the psychic change makes possible. For as it opens us to the cosmic consciousness, now hidden from us by many walls of limiting individuality, so also it opens us to what is now superconscient to our normality, because it is hidden from us by the strong, hard, and bright lid of mind. Mind constricting, dividing, and separative. The lid thins, is slit, breaks asunder, or opens and disappears under the pressure of the psycho-spiritual change and the natural urge of the new spiritualized consciousness towards that of which it is an expression here. This effectuation of an aperture and its consequences may not at all take place if there is only a partial psychic emergence. This effectuation of an aperture and its consequences may not at all take place if there is only a partial psychic emergence, satisfied with the experience of the divine reality in the normal degrees of the spiritualized mind. But if there is an awakening to the existence of these higher supernormal levels, then an aspiration towards them may break the lid or operate a rift in it. This may happen long before the psycho-spiritual change is complete, or even before it has well begun or proceeded far, because the psychic personality has become aware and has an eager concentration towards the superconscious. So, this is very clear what Sri Aurobindo here is saying, that along with the psychic emergence, or when the psychic comes forward, it also helps to bring about two things. It brings about psychicization of the nature and the descent of the spiritual forces of light, truth, and delight, Satchidanand, into the being, into the outer nature. But when the psychic is fully realized, that means one is living in the psychic, then also the psychic realization helps bring about the ascent of consciousness towards the overmind and supermind, and allows those, that wideness and those forces and that experience to take place in the being. So it is through the psychic one can go to the spiritual and the supramental. That is what Sri Aurobindo is saying here. So this also the psychic change makes possible, for as it opens us to the cosmic consciousness, now hidden from us by many walls of limiting individuality, so also it opens us to what is now superconscient to our normality, because it is hidden from us by the strong, hard and bright lid of mind. So in the same way it opens us to what is now superconscient, because that is hidden from the strong, hard and bright lid of mind. That what is highest lid of mind that is spoken of in the Isha Upanishad. In fact, these are almost, I think, a literal translation of what is written down, the golden lid that hides the greater sun. So, in the Upanishad. So, he's actually just translating it into English. That is the overmind. So, the different reaches of the mind up to the overmind, where the hard lid stops. There's a kind of a thing that doesn't break. Then the psychic can help penetrate that, cause a aperture in it, like a hole in it, and then from there these higher force can descend and you can ascend up. So basically what the importance of the emergence, and of not only of the emergence but of the realization of the psychic, are very, very important. So there are three movements here. One is the psychic influencing and guiding the outer nature, and putting a pressure and giving intimations to the outer nature and slowly bringing about a change. Second is the coming forward of the psychic, what is called the emergence of the psychic being. The coming forward of the psychic being, not the psychic entity. The psychic entity gives the influence. Psychic being comes forward, which is an amalgamated being of the inner mind, the inner vital and the inner body with the psychic entity. When the psychic being comes forward, then it brings about a change of nature, opening up to the cosmic consciousness. All those things that we read about, the illuminations of the mind, life and body, the intimations that come to us and so on, the kind of inner kind of perceptions of when one is going towards the darkness and when one is going towards the light and so on. But the third thing the psychic does, when there is a full psychic realization, that means you're living in the psychic being. It's not just emerging and disappearing. Because emergence can also go backwards. But the realization of the psychic takes place when the psychic being becomes the ruler of your life, becomes the ruling guide of your life. When that happens, Sri Aurobindo is saying, it is then that this lid, the highest that you can go up in ascent in consciousness to the overmind, and from the overmind to the supermind. And so the ascension and the descension of that force. Okay? So this is the last. This also the psychic change makes possible. For as it opens to the cosmic consciousness now hidden from us by many walls of limiting individuality, so also it opens us to what is now superconscient, to our normality, because it is hidden from us by the strong, hard and bright lid of mind constricting, dividing and separative. The lid thins, is slit, breaks asunder, or opens and disappears under the pressure of the psycho-spiritual change and the natural urge of the new spiritualized consciousness towards that of which it is an expression here. This effectuation of an aperture and its consequences may not at all take place if there is only a partial psychic emergence, satisfied with the experience of the divine reality in the normal degrees of the spiritualized mind. But if there is an awakening to the existence of these higher supernormal levels, then an aspiration towards them may break the lid or operate a rift in it. This may happen long before the psycho-spiritual change is complete, or even before it has well begun or proceeded far, because the psychic personality has become aware and has an eager concentration towards the superconscious. So it is this psychic personality, awareness and its eager concentration towards the superconscious that creates this rift and this aperture. So there is an aspiration for it. Without that, it doesn't happen. So when the psychic personality, living in the psychic, and there is an aspiration towards this and a concentration towards, an eager concentration towards the superconscious, that is what helps in rending the lid apart. So an early illumination from above or a rending of the upper velamen can come as an outcome of aspiration or some inner readiness, or it may even come uncalled for or not called for by any conscious part of the mind, perhaps by a secret subliminal necessity or by an action or pressure from the higher levels, by something which is felt as the touch of the divine being, the touch of the spirit, and its results can be exceedingly powerful. But if it is brought about by a premature pressure from below, it can be attended with difficulties and dangers which are absent when the full psychic emergence precedes. When the full psychic, so if there's only by a premature pulling down without the emergence and the coming forward of the psychic being, then what happens is, if it can be attended with difficulties and dangers which are absent when the full psychic emergence precedes this first admission to the superior ranges of our spiritual evolution. The choice, however, does not always rest with our will, for the operations of the spiritual evolution in us are very various, and according to the line it has followed, will be the turn taken at any critical phase by the action of the consciousness force in its urge towards a higher self-manifestation and formation of our existence. If the rift in the lid of mind is made, that same thing, the aperture, if the rift in the lid of mind is made, what happens is an opening of vision to something above us, or a rising up towards it, or a descent of its powers into our being. So it could be a rising up, an ascent, or it could be a descent, or it could be a vision of something that is above us. So any of these three things could happen when the lid of the mind is rent. If the rift in the lid of mind is made, what happens is an opening of vision to something above us, or a rising up towards it, or a descent of its powers into our being. What we see by the opening of vision is an infinity above us, an eternal presence, or an infinite existence, an infinity of consciousness, an infinity of bliss, a boundless self, a boundless light, a boundless power, a boundless ecstasy. It may be that for a long time, all that is obtained is the occasional or frequent or constant vision of it, and a longing and aspiration, but without anything further, because although something in the mind, heart, or other part of the being has opened to this experience, the lower nature as a whole is too heavy and obscure as yet for more. So it may be that it comes partially and you get this experience and then it fades away because of the lower nature's heaviness. So it will take time. But there may be, instead of this first wide awareness from below or subsequently to it, an essential. So he talks about all the three things. And this is what Sri Aurobindo, how wonderfully explores. It's like a explorer who is setting out a geographical map. But this geographical map is actually a map of the spiritual evolution and travel and discovery, not of a physical place, but it's so precise, it's so exact. He goes into each movement. It could be this, and if it is this, this is what will happen to you. However, if it is the second movement, this is what will happen to you. If there's a third, you take this route, this is what will happen to you. All three routes are possible. It depends on your turn of evolution, what your own past evolution has brought you to. So it is absolutely like Columbus. I cannot explain it. It's so precise. But can you follow it, or am I going too fast? Right. So this is the second and then the third. Anyway, I wanted to read some things from Letters on Yoga, which I haven't done. So do you want me to complete this and then read it? So what he's saying is, what we see by the opening of vision. So if there's a rift, if the rift in the lid of the mind is made, what happens is an opening of vision to something above us. Now, if there is an opening of vision to something above us, what we see is the following. Now, this is what? A boundless light, a boundless self, a boundless power, a boundless ecstasy. Ecstasy, it may be that for a long time all that is obtained attained is the occasional or frequent or constant vision of it, and a longing and aspiration, but without anything further, because although something in the mind, heart, or other part of the being has opened to this experience, the lower nature as a whole is too heavy and obscure as yet for more. But there may be, instead of this first wide awareness from below, or subsequently to it, an ascension of the mind to heights above. So, however, he says, it could be a vision, but it also could be the ascension of the mind to heights above. If it is the second route that has happened to you, then what happens? If your mind is ascended to something, to the heights above, then what happens? The nature of these heights we may not know or clearly discern, but some consequence of the ascent is felt. There is often two in the awareness of infinite ascension and return, but no record or translation of that higher state. So there's an awareness of infinite ascension and return, but no record or translation of that higher state. This is because it has been superconscient to mind, and therefore mind, when it rises to it, is unable at first to retain there its power of conscious discernment and defining experience. But when this power begins to awake and act, when mind becomes by degrees conscious in what was to it superconscient, then there begins a knowledge and experience of superior planes of existence. The experience is in accord with that which is brought to us by the first opening of vision. So then this experience becomes in accord, means it joins in accordance with that which is brought to us by the first opening of vision. The mind rises into a higher plane of pure self, silent, tranquil, illimitable, or it rises into regions of light or of felicity, or into planes where it feels an infinite power or a divine presence, or experiences the contact of a divine love or beauty, or the atmosphere of a wider and greater and luminous knowledge. So in the return, the spiritual impression abides, but the mental record is often blurred and remains as a vague or a fragmentary memory. The lower consciousness from which the ascent took place falls back to what it was, with only the addition of an unkept or a remembered but no longer dynamic experience. In time, the ascent comes to be made at will, and the consciousness brings back and retains some effect or some gain of its temporary sojourn in these higher countries of the spirit. These ascents take place for many in trance, but are perfectly possible in a concentration of the waking consciousness, or where that consciousness has become sufficiently psychic at any unconcentrated moment by an upward attraction or affinity. But these two types of contact with the superconscient, though they can be powerfully illuminating, ecstatic, or liberating, are by themselves insufficiently effective. For the full spiritual transformation, more is needed: a permanent ascension from the lower into the higher consciousness, and an effectual permanent descent of the higher into the lower nature. This is the third motion, the descent, which is essential for bringing the permanent ascension. So this is the third. So he says the first two are useful, you get many experiences, but it is not complete. And a lot of us have those experiences in trance or in some sort of a samadhi. However, he says, the third motion is what completes it and makes it permanent. But for the full spiritual transformation, more is needed. So this is okay it gives you the experience, but does not transform your nature completely, the whole nature. So for that you need the descent, the movement of descent. This is the third motion, the descent, which is essential for bringing the permanent ascension. So the descent is required for what? For bringing the permanent ascension. Otherwise, ascension comes and goes. You go there, sometimes you can't remember, sometimes you are in a trance, you come back, you don't carry that experience back, you don't assimilate that, when you're back, you're in the other consciousness, you leave that high status of consciousness. But for the permanent ascension to be living in that wideness and to be living in life, you need the descent of consciousness. So this is the third motion. You remember the three motions? Vision first, second is ascension of the mind into the higher planes, and the third is the descent of consciousness. So this is the third motion, the descent, which is essential for bringing the permanent ascension, an increasing inflow from above. So an increasing inflow from above an experience of reception. So, what is the experience of reception? You to receive, and retention, to retain. So, an experience of reception and retention of the descending spirit or its powers and elements of consciousness. This experience of descent can take place as a result of the other two movements or automatically before either has happened. Through a sudden rift in the lid or a percolation, a downpour or an influx. A light descends and touches, or envelops or penetrates the lower being, the mind, the life, or the body. Or a presence or a power or a stream of knowledge pours in waves or currents, or there is a flood of bliss or a sudden ecstasy. The contact with the superconscient has been established. For such experiences repeat themselves till they become normal, familiar, and well understood, revelatory of their contents and their significance, which may have at first been involved and wrapped into secrecy by the figure of the covering experience. For a knowledge from above begins to descend, frequently, constantly, then uninterruptedly, and to manifest in the mind's quietude or silence. Intuitions and inspirations, revelations born of a greater sight, a higher truth and wisdom enter into the being. A luminous intuitive discrimination works which dispels all darkness of understanding or dazzling confusions, puts all in order. A new consciousness begins to form. The mind of a high, wide, self-existent thinking, knowledge, or an illumined, or an intuitive, or an over-mental consciousness with new forces of thought or sight and a greater power of direct spiritual realization, which is more than thought or sight, a greater becoming in the spiritual substance of our being. The heart and the sense become subtle, intense, large, to embrace all existence, to see God, to feel and hear and touch the eternal, to make a deeper and closer unity of self in the world in a transcendent realization. Other decisive experiences, other changes of consciousness determine themselves, which are corollaries and consequences of this fundamental change. No limit can be fixed to this evolution, for it is in its nature an invasion by the infinite. This is wonderful. It is in its nature an invasion by the infinite. It is like the infinite invades us, completely invades us, this descent. So this is what Sri Aurobindo is writing about here. Quite extraordinary. Again, it is like a scientist who's, setting out the whole map, the territory, the different routes, and the end of each route, and saying that, these are the possible ways. You can see that he's almost preparing, even by the reading of it, you're preparing yourself to, and opening oneself to this experience at whatever time and stage it will come. Because this explanation in English not been there so far. Forget English, in any language. Even in Sanskrit, this is not there. Even the Upanishads don't explain it like this, or the Vedas, or the Gita, for example. This is quite extraordinary, and that's why these 5 chapters at the bottom of the End of Life Divine have a sort of revelatory and a different vibration, because they bring not only the knowledge of the path, but also create the path, the cells in our body to experience this. If one continues to read it, it bears repetition because it's new, and it sinks into the darkness after some time, into our own subconscious and inconscious. So the more you can bring it in and strengthen it by the reading, by the meditation, by the dwelling on it, even mentally, it will have a great impact on opening those passages and creating those those experiences. So I just wanted to once again clarify, which these letters of Sri Aurobindo do. He says, between the psychization and spiritualization there is a difference. The spiritual is the change that descends from above. The psychic is the change that comes from within, by the psychic dominating the mind, vital and physical. So this is the difference between the two. One comes from within and one descends from above. Psychization means the change of the lower nature, bringing right vision into the mind, right impulse and feeling into the vital, right movement and habit into the physical, all turned towards the divine. all based on love, adoration, bhakti. Finally, the vision and sense of the Mother everywhere, in all as well as in the heart, her force working in the being, faith, consecration, surrender. This is what the psychization is. What is the spiritual change? The spiritual change is the established descent of the peace, light, knowledge, power, bliss from above, the awareness of the self and the divine and of a higher cosmic consciousness, and the change of the whole consciousness to that. And then he goes on to say, neither of these two movements, the psychic and the spiritual, is complete without the other. Both are needed. If the spiritual ascent and descent are not made, the spiritual transformation of the nature cannot happen. If the full psychic opening and connection is not made, the transformation cannot be complete. So this is very, very important. Both are needed, There is no incompatibility between the two movements. Some begin the psychic first, others the spiritual first. Some carry on both together. The best way is to aspire for both. The best way is to aspire for both and let the Mother's force work it out according to the need and turn of the nature. So it's very important how Sri Aurobindo keeps saying that each of us are unique. It is the need and turn of your nature that will decide. Let the Mother decide which one to come, which one. So aspire for both. Don't decide which one you want to do. So if the development of a higher consciousness did not bring things that were not before, I don't want to read this. So the psychic is the first of two transformations necessary. If you have the psychic transformation, it facilitates immensely the other. Okay? That is the transformation of the ordinary into the higher spiritual consciousness. Otherwise, one is likely to have either a slow and dull or exciting but perilous journey that we've read about, all the asuras and what happens. So, now very interesting, very practical. Okay. I have read your account of your sadhana. There is nothing to say, I think, for it is all right, except that the most important thing for you is to develop the psychic fire in the heart and the aspiration for the psychic being to come forward as the leader of the sadhana. When the psychic does so, when the psychic being comes forward, what happens? When the psychic does so, it will show you the undetected ego knots of which you speak and loosen them or burn them in the psychic fire. So these undetected ego knots, which is what holds us back from any kind of divine experience or illumination or realization or progress, are these undetected ego knots. The way forward is to keep the psychic fire burning in the heart and allow the psychic to come forward, which will detect automatically these undetected ego knots will loosen and come forward. You will be able to see them first. And then when you are able to see them, they will loosen. When the psychic does so, it will show you the undetected ego knots of which you speak and loosen them or burn them in the psychic fire. This psychic development and the psychic change of mind, vital and physical consciousness is of the utmost importance because it makes safe and easy the descent of the higher consciousness and the spiritual transformation, without which the supramental must always remain far distant. Powers, etc. have their place, but a very minor one so long as this is not done. So everything is dangerous in the sadhana, or can be, Sri Aurobindo comments, except one thing, the psychic change. That is the only thing that has no danger. I'm just reading what he's writing.